Hey, everybody. While all of our attention regarding Iran is on the geopolitics, the military side, all of that, we have talked a little bit about the possibility that there will be protests and what the future is for the Iranian people. But in this video, I want to focus on a topic that is not getting enough attention, and it needs to, morally, ethically, we need to talk about it more, and that is the horrible abuses of the Iranian regime against its people that are ongoing, and specifically the executions that are taking place on pretty much a daily basis. And the situation with that is getting worse. And I feel it is a moral imperative to use my voice, to use this channel, to give more attention to this very important topic. So please, I'm going to ask you at the beginning of this video this time, please share this video as widely as you can, because this is an aspect of what's going on in Iran that the world needs to pay more attention to. And thankfully, in the last couple of days, it looks like somewhat the world is, but this needs to become a central narrative in the war and part of everything. So let's get into it. Let's talk about what's actually going on. So here's a headline. And this is from today, or from Saturday. Iran executes 2 prisoners as courts issue protest-related death sentences. Iran has carried out the executions of 2 prisoners convicted of murder while issuing and upholding several death sentences against individuals arrested during the nationwide protests that began in late 2025, according to reports by the human rights activist news agency. Meanwhile, prisoners at Gazeh Hisar prison have continued a hunger strike in protest against the implementation of death sentences. Separately, Branch 5 of the Revolutionary Court in Isfahan sentenced 22-year-old rapper Menam Nawab Safavi to death on a charge of Moharabe. Moharabe is enmity against God. That was his crime. Safavi, who was arrested during the January 2026 nationwide protest, was accused of involvement in the destruction of public property, propaganda against the regime, assembly and collusion against national security, and encouraging people to commit murder. A source close to his family said one of the allegations against him was writing protest slogans. And then we had an announcement a couple of days ago by the United Nations, which is never a bastion of moral clarity. But on July 23rd, just a couple of days ago, independent UN human rights investigators Thursday called for Iran to immediately halt the execution of 10 men who took part in a protest in the central city of Isfahan earlier this year, warning that some of their relatives have already been called for final visits. The appeal by the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission on Iran follows the July 19th execution of 2 other men in the same case. Efran Esfandiari, reportedly 18 years old, and Gul Mohammad Mohammadi, a 23-year-old Afghan national, which it strongly condemned. The mission was concerned that the Iranian authorities are fast-tracking capital punishment cases against the protests and national security issues. Members point to a July 15th announcement by Tehran Prosecutor General Ali Salehi, following a directive from the head of the judiciary, Gholam Hassan Mohseni Ejei, to expedite proceedings. In other words, they are expediting the cases so that they can move to quicker executions. And there's some suspicion that this has a lot to do with the acceleration of the war, with the escalation that's going on now, that the Iranian regime wants to, is worried about the people rising up. So they want to execute as many of these dissidents as they can. Right now, EU sanctions Iranian judges amid mounting concerns over execution. So we saw the UN, and now we see the EU stepping up. This is a headline also from Saturday. As Tehran intensifies its domestic crackdown, the EU will continue to hold those responsible to account, said Kaja Kallas. Kaya, her name? The European Union imposed fresh sanctions on 5 Iranian judges and the founder of a cyber group accused of helping Tehran suppress information on Friday. That's a couple days ago, stepping up pressure on the Islamic Republic as rights groups warned of a looming surge in executions following the collapse of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire. UN Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said the new measures targeted individuals allegedly responsible for human rights violations as Iranian authorities intensified their domestic crackdown. Quote, as Tehran intensifies its domestic crackdown, the EU will continue to hold those responsible to account, Kala said in a post on X. The latest measures bring the total number of people and entities sanctioned by the European Union over Iran's human rights record to 269 individuals and 53 organizations. The sanctions come as international human rights organizations warn that Tehran could sharply increase the executions of political prisoners and protesters following the collapse of the ceasefire between the United States and Iran and the resumption of hostilities. That's what they're worried about, because with the resumption of hostilities and the further destabilization of the regime, they want to intensify the reign of terror on the people, make the imminence of death if you are a protester more present, and discourage people from coming out into the streets. I mean, this is and also kill as many of these dissidents as they can while they're under fire. Mahmoud Amiri Moghadam, director of the Norway-based group Iran Human Rights, said the renewed conflict risked providing the authorities with cover to accelerate executions. Quote, with the collapse of the ceasefire and the resumption of the war, we're deeply concerned that the authorities will exploit the situation to intensify the execution of political prisoners, he said. The organization said hundreds of political prisoners and protesters currently face charges that carry the death penalty, with around 100 already sentenced to death. Iran Human Rights has repeatedly urged the international community to place Iran's use of capital punishment at the center of any negotiations with Tehran. The international community, the European Union in particular, must make the immediate suspension of executions a central issue in any negotiations, Amir Moghadam said. Listen, I'm not for negotiations, but this is a very important point, and we haven't talked about it enough, that this should be part of, like when they talk about, whenever you hear Trump or Rubio or whoever, or the mediators, anyone who's talking about the demands being made on Iran, the halting the executions of political prisoners has to be at the top of the list. We need to raise a voice for these people. We need to speak out for it. And that's why I'm making this video. In terms of Iran's reaction to the EU, because the Iranians like to play the game of getting the UN and the EU to come to their aid, which sadly, tragically, they often do. But here now we see the United Nations and the EU both calling out Iran. Now, you might say, oh, big deal, it's just words. You're right. These are not organizations that we look to really for moral clarity, but it is a good sign. It's a good sign that the narrative on this is being elevated, and that these organizations, the EU and the UN, are speaking up about this, that this is becoming more of an issue. That's good. We should amplify that. That's why I'm asking you, share this video. We need to amplify this issue. Okay. Bagai. So Bagai is, of course, the foreign ministry spokesman, this guy with the glasses. Bagai, EU's claim of concern for Iranian human rights is pure hypocrisy. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Ismail Bagai, has forcefully rejected claims of human rights concerns raised by European officials, describing the stance of the EU as outright hypocrisy. In response to recent statements made by Kaja Kallas, the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Bagai remarked, Kaja Kallas speaks of the European Union's human rights concerns regarding Iran. He added, how can a professed commitment to human rights be so easily reconciled with providing logistical and technical support for lethal aggressions against the Iranian people, aggressions that deliberately target civilians and critical national infrastructure, all while refusing to condemn even the most blatant war crimes and offering not a single word of sympathy for the Iranian children slaughtered by American-Israeli bombs and missiles enabled by the EU's own logistical and technical support. This is not merely a loss of credibility. It is the banality of evil and the purest form of hypocrisy, Bagai concluded. Now, why did I read this to you? Not only because it's absurd, but because it shows that the Iranians are rattled by this. You see, like I said before, the Iranians like to highlight when some French diplomat says something positive, or that maybe, they're always trying to make it seem that they're in better relations with the world community, and they still have this kind of legitimacy in the UN and in that kind of international community arena. And the fact that they're usually, when they get criticized internationally, they don't even mention it. It doesn't even, like, they just ignore it. They pretend it didn't happen. And the fact that they're doing an article, that they're putting out an article pushing back on it, means that I think they're a little bit rattled by it, which is good. But again, that's their reaction. And now let's take a look at some more details about what's going on. This is from Article 19. Article 19 is a free speech human rights group, and they put this out on Friday. Iran crackdown on human rights intensifies with surge in executions. I just want to read you a few excerpts here. Article 19 condemns the recent surge in executions across Iran. In June alone, 109 individuals, including 3 women, were executed, a 10% increase from the same time last year. Since the outbreak of conflict with Israel and the United States, more than 50 individuals have reportedly been executed on charges related to the January protests, raising serious concerns that the regime is exploiting the conflict to justify the executions and spread fear among the Iranian population, and that the death penalty is being used as a tool of political repression. At least 5 individuals were executed last month on political charges, including espionage, following their detainment during the January protests. 3 men, Ashkan Maleki, Mehrdad Mohammadinia, and Arman Marafati, were tried in a joint case, charged with Moharabeh, enmity against God. That's the charge, being enemies of God, and were sentenced to death. Human rights organizations report that security forces used torture to elicit the confessions upon which sentences were determined, and the individuals, which means that the confessions were worthless, and the individuals were prevented from appointing their own legal counsel. Ashkan Maleki and Mehrdad Mohammadinia were executed on June 1st in Karaj, while the current status of Arman Marafati is unknown. Ahad Shokuyan, a flower market worker in Tehran, received 3 death sentences on July 23rd, that's just last week, for his participation in the demonstrations, meaning this is ongoing. While everything else is going on with Iran and the potential negotiations and the bombing, they are still moving forward at a swift pace, trying, convicting, and executing protesters and citizens of Iran. These charges were handed down despite Shukian being only one of several defendants in the case, and after an official forensic medical report indicated that his severe asthma would have prevented him from performing the actions claimed by the security forces. The escalating use of executions reflects the Iranian authorities' broader effort to silence dissent through arbitrary detention, torture, enforced disappearances, coerced confessions, and unfair trials. The recent directive issued by Iran's Ministry of Intelligence under Article 4 of the Law on Intensifying Punishment for Espionage and Cooperation with the Zionist Regime and Hostile States, there is such a law, significantly expanded the scope for imposing severe punishments, including the death penalty on individuals accused of vaguely defined national security offenses, heightening our concerns. And this is from earlier on Saturday. Is Iran using the war to accelerate executions and silence dissent? As international attention remains fixed on the Iran-U.S. war and regional escalation, human rights advocates say Tehran is intensifying another campaign largely outside the global spotlight, the execution of protesters. The bombs are making noise and the world is looking at Iran, but what about the silence that is killing innocent people every day? Azada Afsahi, founder of Iran House, told Iran International's Eye for Iran podcast. Rights groups say the war did not create the crackdown, but has provided political cover for the Islamic Republic to fast-track death sentences, conceal executions from families, and intimidate a population already traumatized by the violent suppression of nationwide protests in January. Rights groups estimate that around 100 political prisoners and protesters have received death sentences, while hundreds more face capital charges. More than 70 people are awaiting execution in the Dastgird prison in the central city of Isfahan, according to Iran Human Rights. And then it mentions Article 19 that we just read from Article 19. Shaheen Milani, executive director of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, said the regime views internal rebellion as a greater threat to its survival than the prospect of large-scale foreign invasion. This is what I've been saying. And that is why I believe that even the military actions that are being taken are directed at the wrong place. If the Americans would start directing their military activities at decapitation of leadership and at IRGC sites. Bomb the prisons that these people are in, meaning do what the Israelis started doing back in the 12-day war, where they started bombing the entrance to prisons and prisons to allow prisoners to escape. Bomb the IRGC headquarters. Bomb the checkpoints where the Basij and the IRGC guys are. Decapitate these judges. Get them assassinated. These are the types of things that would actually empower the Iranian people and destabilize the regime. I'm going to read that again. The most serious, the Islamic Republic may fear its own population more than U.S. military action. The Islamic Republic may fear its own population more than U.S. military action. This is what I've been saying. The most serious threat they face is from internal rebellion. This is from the Iranian people bringing the regime down. Milani said the severity of the January crackdown demonstrated how seriously the authorities viewed the threat. They set a new standard in their own regime for brutality. The executions, Milani argued, are intended both to frighten the wider population and demonstrate strength to regime supporters who might otherwise consider defecting. See, this is why stopping what we were doing, what the Israelis were doing in the last 2 weeks of March and the first week of April, in the last 3 weeks of the 40 days of bombing that started on February 28th, what the Israelis were doing, attacking the Basij, attacking the IRGC, was causing defections. And it was, we were getting really close to the regime collapsing, and that's been reversed. All of this bombing of bridges and bombing of military installations, everything the Americans are doing, while they're doing it, internally, the regime is consolidating. They're killing more protesters. They're bringing in more Shiite militias from other countries who are willing to kill Iranian protesters. They're cracking down on people. They're executing people to instill more terror. They are actually strengthening their regime. Remember, their goal is to stay in power. Afsahi said, I'm sorry, let's finish this. He said they may delay further unrest, but meaning the executions can delay further unrest, but cannot resolve the economic hardship and political discontent driving opposition to the government. Quote, you cannot kill your way out of economic misery and discontent, he said, predicting renewed demonstrations could emerge within months or years. Afsahi said the crackdown has deepened depression and trauma among survivors and victims' families, with international attention, while international attention remains concentrated on the military conflict. Everybody cares about the bombs, but nobody cares about the hanging that is happening every day, she said. Despite that trauma, Afsahi said that many survivors remain prepared to protest again. They're just waiting, she said. They're ready for that next ignition to be able to go out again. Iranian prisoners have also begun challenging the execution campaign from inside the country. About 1,500 prisoners sentenced to death for drug-related offenses in Unit 2 of the Ghazel Hasar prison have staged a hunger strike and a sit-in since July 13th. The protest began after 6 inmates were transferred to solitary confinement in preparation for execution. The protest has added a rare form of resistance from inside Iran's prisons to the growing international campaign against the executions, according to the advocates interviewed by Eye for Iran. They said the executions may demonstrate the regime's capacity for repression, but they also reveal its fear that the anger driving Iran's protest movement remains unresolved. The war may have pushed the movement out of the headlines. It has not, they warned, eliminated it. And finally, let's take a look at some recent positive signs from Trump on this issue. Trump calls Iranian officials savages after latest executions of protesters. President Donald Trump condemned Iran's leadership, and this is from last week, after the execution of 2 protesters over the weekend, calling officials savages amid a widening crackdown on dissent during the war with the United States. And then it mentions, we've mentioned these 2 before, Esfandiari and Mohammadi. Trump reposted several messages on his Truth Social platform about the executions of Irfan Esfandiari and Gul Mohammad Mohammadi, including one where he reposted a message about Mohammadi's execution while adding the latest one of 52,000 plus innocent protesters, savages. In another post on July 21st, Trump shared a message featuring a photograph of Esfandiari alongside the appeal, please help, please be their voice. And he shared this. He also reposted an image of a woman crying in front of a burning Iranian flag while holding a sign reading, "Don't kill us." A day earlier, Trump had also reposted a Truth Social message by Iranian journalist and activist Masih Alinejad, calling attention to Esfandiari's execution. So these are good signs. If Trump is posting things, remember when Trump posts things, that's not just off the cuff. He's posting in the space of 2 days. It says here he reposted and posted a few times about this issue. So maybe it is coming to the fore a little bit more in terms of Trump's priorities about where we're going with this war. But we need to elevate this. This needs to become a central narrative of what's going on in the war when we talk about Iran. And I'm going to be trying to cover it as much as possible. And please share this video with as many people as you can, because this is a story that we owe it to the victims and we owe it to the Iranian people to elevate this narrative in the context of this war. God bless.